Well, good day, my friends. Today we are in Florida to explore the history of one of the FBI's most famous standoffs. Daze with Jordan the Lion and Dearly Departed with Scott Michaels. It begins right now. So this is actually something you have to arrange a tour with the Park Service to even do, but this is the Ma Barker and her boys standoff, final standoff. I've actually been trying to do this for several years, and they sent me an email this week that they had some cancellations, so that's how we were able to get in here. So our tour starts on this little trolley here. Tour has begun.
My wife keeps talking about it's so cold. We haven't had no.
Oh, like I've never heard that.
One day and it's gone.
Our first sight.
Correct a few things right off the bat. It was not the FBI. It was the Department of Investigation. This was in January 16, 1935, and the FBI never became officially FBI until January 1, 1936. So it is the Department of Investigation, who was under control by the Justice Department, who is headed by J. Edgar Hoover. So is that close enough to say FBI? Yeah. 2,000 rounds were fired into this house in the shootout. That kind of came about by hearsay, and finally one day when Carson Good and his sister decided to sell this house in 2014, they put it up for auction with Sotheby's in New York City. It sat on 9 acres over here on North Shore, and they wanted $1 million for the house. They wanted to sell it as a museum. They got no takers. But there's an interview out there with the guy from Sotheby's, Carson Good, great-great-grandson of Carson Bradford, and the question was asked how many bullet holes are in the house, and he said over 2,000. Joe Vogue, who was sitting in there at the dining room table that same day, knows a lot about this house, and he told me one time he swallowed his false teeth when that number came out of his mouth because he knew there was nowhere close to that. The official count taking the date after the shootout was 641 bullets into the house. Of that 641, 147 of them are in that upstairs room there. Of that 147, there's 3 in Maul's chest area, close to her heart. Freddie has 9 high-powered rifle shots in his left shoulder, 3 bullet wounds to his head, 2 of them penetrating his skull. So, but as the old saying goes, when myth becomes larger than the truth, they print the myth. So those were the 2,000 kind of came about. They also estimated that the Barkers shot out 250. They don't know that for sure. So that clears that up a little bit. Yes, they floated this house across the lake. That made national news. Another thing about
it was not originally here.
Yeah, they said, you'll read it was a 4 or 5 hour shootout. According to all the FBI memos and records, it was really only about a 2-hour shootout and a 3-hour standoff. The shooting probably ended somewhere around 9 o'clock, but nobody went in the house till noon that day. Before they moved this house, like I say, they didn't sell the house as a museum. Finally, some developers came along and offered them $750,000 for that 9 acres over there, prime real estate. And so they sold it, and the people that bought the property did not want this house. In fact, they were going to tear this house down.
Oh, wow.
George Albright III, who is our local county tax attorney, grew up just down from this house. He went to the county commissioners and said, we can have this house, they'll give us this house. The big catch is we've got to get it off this property in 30 days and we're going to tear it down. So believe it or not, county government can work quickly. They came up with somewhere between $230,000 and $260,000 to move this house off that property. And it was cheaper for them to float it across the lake than it would have been if they took it around They've got to cut power lines down. They've got to trim trees and all of that. So they decided to float it across the lake. And most people think floating across the lake is one side all the way the other. It really was just a kind of a catty-corner place down here. As you can see here, it's real steep. So when they got the house over here, they couldn't bring it straight up here. So if you go down there where James is walking toward that bad house and take a hard right, it's not near as steep as there. And that's where the house, it did sit down there for about 2 weeks while they waited on the monolithic concrete slab here to cure out before they put it up there. A couple things happened over there at the house before they moved it. They had a metal detecting group come out of the land over here, and they metal detected everything around some of the trees and they find bullet casings. They found actual bullets that would have been fired at the agents from the Barkers. Freddie Barker was known to wear a little pinky ring. They came across this little ring, gold ring, had the initials of FGB, which would have stood for Frederick George Barker. How that ring got there in the sand, we don't know. Speculation is that the bodies laid in the house so long that they bled out, and when they removed the bodies, that ring slid off of Freddie's finger. Over there, they put these pneumatic remote control wheels underneath the house. Over there, they could dig in the sand to get the wheels under it. And they got all the wheels under it. And this little barge that they had, it was a makeshift barge, kind of went together like a jigsaw puzzle, fit it all together. They drove it on the barge, and a little old 16-foot John boat pushed this house across the lake.
Wow.
They did anything they thought would get broke. They just laid on the floor. They did not strap that chimney down. You can see those pictures in there. They did have to remove the bottom part of the porch. The roof was still original, but it was ate up with termites. So they bring it over here, sets down there, finally rolled it up here, get it up on this concrete slab, turn it 180 degrees, and now we're going to get the wheels out from under it. But now we're sitting on concrete and they couldn't get it out. So the house nowadays sits 2 blocks higher than it did at its original location. You can kind of tell that by those steps. The bottom 2 steps have been added on. These brick columns you see around the outside, those are really concrete blocks now. They took the original brick and had a masonry guy kind of shave them all down and stuck them up on that block. Kind of a different facade now, but they are the original brick that the house sat on. The house was built in 1930. It's 2,100 square feet. It has 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. One of the first houses built with gypsum board. So all the bullet holes at one time in this house was patched. If you see actual bullet holes, it's going to be where people have stuck their fingers or pocket knives over the years. But if you look around the outside of it, you will see that it was patched. They did a terrible, terrible job of patching these. They didn't quite know what they were doing because gypsum board was still new. So they stick out pretty bad. So you can see that. Another interesting thing in the house, back there in that room off of the kitchen is a door that was not with the house when they got ready to move it. The day before the workers got there to move it over here, they got there that morning and that door was leaned up next to the house. I call them still got bullet wounds in them. You can tell the bullets have hit it. It's just our theory that somebody had this old door as a keepsake, a souvenir or whatever, and they decided when the house was going to get moved, that door needed to go with the house, so it's cleaned up back there. 80 to 90% of the furniture in this house, some of the furniture has been there since 1930, so it's really, really fragile, so we ask you don't try to sit on too much or lean on the table. All the pictures you can pick up, do whatever you want to with them. We just ask to be real fast, and it's been in a shootout with the federal government, so. I even tell people those rocking chairs on the front porch are original, however they came off the front porch of a Cracker Barrel. We kind of got those when we started back up after COVID, so you could separate people every 6 foot, you know. Both bathrooms and the kitchen has been remodeled. They still use this house until 2014, the weekend getaway, vacation home, the fact that they lived in Miami. You're going to notice a lot of the furniture you're going to think is really, really high dollar antique stuff. That would be because the Bradford family, originally from Nashville, Tennessee, owned the Bradford Furniture Manufacturing Company. So that's how that all came about. A little bit about the star of the show, Mal Barker. Her given name when she was born was Arizona Donnie Clark. She didn't like the name Arizona, so she kind of started calling herself Kate or Katie. And when she was 17 years old, she married a gentleman 14 years her senior named George Elias Barker. Together they went on, they had 4 boys. Herman, Lloyd, Arthur, or they called him Doc, Freddie. All 4 boys will die at one shot. 19 and 29, Daddy George, when they interviewed him later, said he just couldn't take it anymore. At that time, he already had 1 son dead. 3 others was either in prison or in jail. And he said that Ma would never let him discipline the boys. They just kind of run wild. They didn't go to school and always in trouble. So he just kind of backed out of the picture. So that's a little bit about Mal Barker. Something else kind of interesting. The day after this shootout, when a 61-year-old mother lay dead up here in this room, J. Edgar Hoover had out a press release that said, Mal Barker was the most vicious, dangerous criminal mind of the last decade. That's his take on it. I always said he was trying to maybe protect his son a little bit. If you talk to friends and family about Mal Barker, they would tell you basically the same thing. She was a simple Southern lady, like to do jigsaw puzzles, listen to hillbilly music, go to the movies once in a while, and attend church on Sundays. Harvey Bailey, we have a picture of him in there. He was known as the Dean of American Bank Robbers. And he grew up with the Barker boys, and he was asked, did Mal Barker plan all the robberies and all the kidnappings? And his reply was, Mal Barker could not plan breakfast. You have that. So you got those 2 sides of the story. The facts are, Mal Barker was never police photographed, never police fingerprinted, never convicted of a crime, and to this day the most important thing to me, if there's this machine gun toting, cigar chomping, bloody mama out there planning all this, nobody has ever placed her at the scene of a crime. You know, all the other criminals, they get fingered because somebody placed them at the scene of a crime. Of course, nowadays we have video cameras and all that, you know, but nobody has ever placed her at the scene of a crime. So you have that to go on. It started kind of in 1928, of course the boys have been in trouble all their life. Freddie Barker was in prison in Kansas State Penitentiary with a gentleman named Alvin Carpus, and that formed the Barker Carpus gang. They got paroled in 1931. In 1932, Arthur or Doc got paroled. He soon joined them, and that's the nucleus of that Barker Carpus gang. They went throughout the Midwest terrorizing it, as many of the gangsters of that day did. It was, you know, right after the Depression, you know, robbing banks, and any place there was money, they would rob. So they did that, and now eventually they have moved into, when they were at St. Paul, Minnesota, they moved into kidnapping. It was right after the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. And they thought it would be easier to do kidnappings than it would to rob banks. You grab somebody, the family's worth some money, you haul him off, send him a ransom note, get the money, nobody's shooting at you, you don't have to shoot back. So the first kidnapping was in St. Paul, Minnesota. They kidnapped a gentleman named William Ham. His dad owned the Ham Brewing Company there in St. Paul. And they had him 3 days and they collected $100,000. About 4 or 5 months later, they decided to try it again. They kidnapped a gentleman named Edward Bremer, and for his release, they wanted $200,000. Old man Bremer tried to do some negotiating with them, tried to get the price lower. They didn't agree to it. The first time they were supposed to got their money, it was a set-up deal that they had been tipped off on, so that didn't work. They finally get their $200,000 after 17 days, and in the suitcase that held the money was a note from Mr. Old Man Bremer saying, I know you told me not to get the feds involved in this, but they demanded to list all the serial numbers, so this money's kind of hot. So the Barker Carpenter had a really tough time of laundering this money. They could get by with a little bit of it at a time, but any time that they try to get really large amounts, the people who was laundering would get exuberant fees for that. So they never did get all the money laundered. At that time, J. Edgar Hoover had his war on crime going, and he was taking out all these big name people you've heard of, like Machine Gun Kelly, Babyface Nelson, Pretty Boy Floyd, John Dillinger, Bonnie and Clyde. They were taking them all out, and that slowly the rise of the Barker Carpenter gang was coming to the top. So they was all in Ohio. They know that the feds are coming after them, so they decide to split up. Doc goes to Chicago. Ma and Freddie go to Miami with another gentleman named Harry Campbell. Alvin Karpus and his very pregnant girlfriend Dolores Delaney, they go to Cuba. While Ma and Freddie are in Miami, they're staying at the El Commodore Motel. And the gentleman that ran that's name was Joe Adams. And he was an in-between go-to guy for all mobsters and gangsters. If you need to get a hold of somebody, if you needed weapons, if you needed a hideout, if you needed to launder money, you went and seen Joe Adams. So Freddie goes to Joe Adams and he tells him that he's looking for a place off the beaten path, would have good hunting and fishing, and a place to get out down here in Florida out of the cold up north. So Joe Adams goes to Mr. Bradford, and they knew each other. They were both on the board of directors at the Biscayne Kennel Club, and he knew he had this house up here in Ocklawaha. He was first turned down, said, no, we've never rented the house before. We're not interested. Freddie and Harry Campbell drove up one day from Miami and checked out the house over on North Shore, and they thought it would be the perfect place for them. They're on a lake. We got the Ocala National Forest for hunting. So they go back and they offer Mr. Bradford $75 a month cash, first and last month paid up front. At that time, houses around the lake were renting for anywhere from $8 to $25. So to me, that should have been Mr. Bradford's first tip-off. Something's not quite right here. It's rumored that he had ran up some gambling debt down there at the Biscayne Kennel Club. So that's how that happened. He agrees to it. Ma and Freddie and Harry Campbell move into this house on November the 7th of 1934, and they spend the next 9 weeks here, right up until the day of the shootout. So that's how they get here. How did the feds get here? As I say, the feds are coming after them. They're knocking off all these other high-profile gangsters, and they've got to the top, and so they're really looking for them hard. They finally find Arthur or Doc Barker in Chicago and know where he's at. They surround his house. He comes out of the house, walking down the sidewalk, and the agents are coming up behind him. He dives between two cars, slips on the ice, and the agents are there with their guns, and they take him. And Doc was known for quite a few famous quotes, you might say. They asked him, said, what's your name? And his reply was, you know who I am. And then they said, "That's right, Doc, where's your weapons?" And Doc pointed to that house and said, "In that house right there. Ain't that a hell of a place for him to be today?" They take him, they whisk him back to St. Paul. They don't want anybody knowing that they have him. Don't want to tip off any of the other gangsters. So in that same night then, they raid a gentleman's house by the name of Brian Bolton. Brian Bolton had been in on both kidnappings. His big claim to fame was he was the watchman for the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in Chicago for Al Capone. He messed that up. He recognized the wrong person, but another story. They get him. There is a shootout there. One gentleman was killed. Brian Bolton surrenders, and he tries to make a deal. First off, over at Doc's house, they found two important things. They found a Florida state map, kind of circled in the middle of Ocala, Ocklawaha area. They found a letter that Ma had written to Doc stating that they were enjoying excuse me, the great weather down here. Hunting, fishing's been good. Your brother is still trying to capture Old Joe, this big legendary 17-foot gator that floated around a lake in Florida. So they have that with Brian Bolton trying to make a deal with them to not go so hard on him. He tells them he could give them the location of the Barker Carpus gang. He tells them it's on a lake near Jacksonville. There's good hunting and fishing. He had been down at the house on weekends, and so they have that to go on. And he also said something about this Old Joe 17-foot legendary gator. So the feds are immediately on a plane over to Jacksonville. They search over there. They find no clues, no interest in what's going on. They hear of this big gator up by Gainesville, Old Joe the gator. And they go up there. They finally speak to a gentleman that knows something about him, and he tells them, yeah, there used to be Old Joe out here, but he's been dead for about 5 years. So they know they're on a dead track up there. So that brings them to Lake Weir, where this other legendary 17-foot gator Old Joe is. So they come to Ocklawaha. They go to the postmaster. Said, is there anybody new in town that you know of? And they said, the only people we know new in town are the Blackbirds, which is an alias that Ma and Freddie had used in the past. They're renting the Bradford home. If you would like to know more about them, you should go see their neighbor over here, Mr. Barber. He just retired from being a guard at Leavenworth State Penitentiary. So they go and talk to Mr. Barber. They show him some pictures. He recognizes the people who live next door to him. And then he especially recognizes Ma, because at one time her second oldest Floyd was doing 25 years at Leavenworth for a burglary, and he remembered her coming to see Lloyd. So they know they're on, they got the right place. So over here on his back porch, Agent Connolly, the special agent in charge, he draws up this map. That map, there's a copy of it right inside the living room door, or the living room door there. And he draws it up. He's got this house. There's an occupied cottage here, unoccupied cottage. There's a little orange grove, a dirt road leading up to the highway. There's 3 buildings that later described in the memo. There's a chicken coop, a shed, and an outhouse. Over on that side, he draws a 2-car garage. He lists Mr. Barber's house, and he shows Miss Westbury's house down here sitting right on the lake. So the night before, January 16th, most of the agents stayed up here in the Ocklawaha Inn. It's right there at the main stoplight, Ocklawaha now. The building's still there. It says Ocklawaha Inn on the end of the building. It was just a rooming house upstairs and a little restaurant, dining area downstairs. But that's where they stayed so they could be close to this house the next morning. They leave up there about 5:30 in the morning. It's still dark. They surround this house. All total 14 agents, Mr. Conley and 13 others. They had them all stationed. They even had one gentleman stationed up on the highway to direct traffic. 1935. 6 o'clock in the morning. How much traffic is there in Aqua? I've never figured that one out, but that was his duty. Everything I'm going to tell you now is based off every agent that day wrote a memo. Probably started out scratching it on the ink, pen, and paper on a car hood. After it's all over, they get back to the office or typing it up on typewriters that may be missing keys, missing letters, and they're trying to do the carbon paper between them, 4 different layers of it. Later, that's all transferred to what they used to call microfiche. Now, of course, you can go on the computer and you can read all this stuff. I will tell you this, it is some tedious reading. Conley's memos say at about 6:45, he approaches from over in this area to about 30 yards away from that screen door, and he barks out the orders. You know, you're surrounded by the Department of Investigation. Come on out, your hands in the air, and no one will get injured. They hear nothing. A few minutes go by. Agent Doc White over here, he steps a little bit forward and says basically the same thing. Little after 7, 5-10 minutes after 7, Conley approaches the house again, and this time says basically the same thing, only this time says, as you come out, we want Freddie Barker first, because they know he's a cold-blooded killer. They're not for sure how many people's in the house. According to all the neighbors, you know, Harry Campbell and his girlfriend, could be Alvin Carpus and his girlfriend. They're not for sure. Could be up to 6 people in the house. But he says basically the same thing and tells them to bring Freddie out first. And he said, if you don't, we are going to fire gas canisters into the house. They hear nothing for a while. Finally, Doc White's memo says that he hears a woman's voice. And it says, what are you going to do? So they hear it. They don't know for sure what woman it is. Later, a few seconds later, Dave's memo says that he hears a lady's voice say, well, go ahead then. They don't hear anything out here. Finally, Conley tells them to fire the gas canisters into the house. They're too far away. They hit the side of the house. So now the agent has tear gas in their eyes out in this area. And the minute that they fire the gas canisters, the memos say machine gun fire came from the southwest upstairs room. So that would have been that window right up there. When it settled there, it set more over that way instead of this way. The agents immediately return fire. He's got Conley kind of sprawling across the ground here, trying to get back to cover. And then one of the memos says simultaneously gunfire. It doesn't say machine gun fire, it just says gunfire came out of the southwest bottom floor. So if that's possible, that pretty much tells us that Maul Barker had to pick up a weapon at some time, and she fired on federal agents, which before that time, only thing she was really guilty was harboring a criminal. But now she's fired on federal agents. They immediately returned fire to those windows. The memo says it only lasted 2 or 3 seconds. And then for the next hour and a half or so, gunfire seems to come out of all the windows in the house, upstairs, downstairs, making it appear that there's more than 2 people in the house. At about 8:30, according to Connolly's memo, he has decided now that there are only 2 people in the house, and he needs to end this gun battle and end it now, because where are the other gangsters? Are they due to come back here anytime? We could be caught in a crossfire. So he tells one of the agents, go up to the car up by the road, get some more gas canisters, shoot them into the back of the window, back of the house, and they do that. And when they do that, the gunfire from inside, now the gun battle becomes out the back of the house now. It finally centers back around to this upstairs room here. Conley has all of his agents fire into this room. He thinks that's where they're at. His memo says at 9 o'clock it got eerily quiet. Daze memo says no gunfire came out of the house after 9:15. So give or take 10-15 minutes there, the gun battle's over. Now nobody goes in this house till noon. Over here, Doc White hears some rumbling coming out inside this cottage. And he goes over there to check it out, and out walks a 26-year-old African-American named Willie Woodbury. And he says, "What are you doing coming out of this house?" He said, "Well, my wife, Annabelle, and I have been hiding under our bed for the last several hours. Didn't know what was going on. Said I thought I hadn't heard nothing for a while, so I'd come out and check it out." So we have a little bit of contention here now because, well, first Doc White said, "Why are you in this house?" He said, "Well, I am the caretaker for the Blackburns." Well, again, that name Blackburn alias that the Barkers had used. So we have a little contention here and memos and stuff, interviews we've read with Willie Woodbury. Willie Woodbury, well, first off, Connolly telegraphs J. Edgar Hoover. It says Willie Woodbury has volunteered to be the first one to go in this house. Even a memo or a telegraph from J. Edgar Hoover back to Connolly stating, "What are you doing? After this big shootout, you're going to send a civilian in," and on top of that, he uses the N word, but he does put the O at the end of it. So he's kind of getting chewed out, Connolly getting chewed out a little bit by J. Edgar Hoover. Willie Woodbury, his interview years later in the Tampa Tribune, he says he was offered $20 and was gave a bulletproof vest to be the first one to go in the house. That's a little bit of contention. You would think if J. Edgar Hoover's chewing on Connolly that he might have said, "Well, Mr. Hoover," he might not mention the money, but he could have said, "We gave him a bulletproof vest." But that's not mentioned. So why would he not mention it? Why would Willie Woodbury do the interview and state what he did? The rest of Willie Woodbury's interview says he walked to that screen door. It was latched on the inside. One of the agents gave him a pocket knife. He slits the screen, unlatches it, walks on in the house. The living room in there is scattered with broken glass and several shell casings. There's a large pool of blood over here in front of those two windows on the bottom floor. He finds nothing downstairs. He goes up the stairway. He notes that there was blood on the wall going up the stairway, and he checks everything out. He finally sticks his head out of those windows up there and says, "They're both here, they're both dead." So now they wait on Coroner Futch to come out of Ocala down here. He comes down here. Later that night, he has an inquiry to make sure that the feds just didn't start firing on innocent people in a house. It's determined that they fired first. He describes Freddie Barker's body as laying in the middle of the floor, face down. When he rolled him over, he was laying on top of a blue steel revolver, appeared jammed. The wooden handle had been hit. He had on a white sleeveless shirt, a pair of dark trousers, and a pair of black loafers. And then it goes on to say, Kate Barker's body was removed from the scene. We have one picture that day that was taken of Kate Maul Barker's body laying upstairs in that room over next to the closet door. You almost have to step over Maul to even got to Freddie, but it just says Kate Barker's body was removed from the scene. So the film was put in a light blue envelope, airmailed to Chicago to get developed, and somewhere along the line it got light to it, and that's the only picture. It's really, really grainy. All the other pictures you're going to see in the house were taken the date after the shootout. Revell Studios from Ocala came down here and took all of them, and there's a memo later, and all the things that the FBI has from J. Edgar Hoover stating, never let this film get in this situation again. Get down here, they take the bodies out of the house, take them back to the mortuary up in Ocala. They're cleaned up some, they're put on 2 tables, and for a dime, for 30 days, for a dime, you could go through there and view the bodies. As the crowd started dwindling down a little bit, they reduced that price to a nickel. And it's rumored that the rug they had there in front of the bodies was wore out. So that's how many people went through it. After that 30 days, they were put down on ice, and they remained there for the next 8 months. Nobody had came to claim the bodies. After the shootout, they found 14 $1,000 bills that the Barkers had. Throughout their investigation, they also found out they had a storage unit in Chicago. It had some furs, some furniture, some jewelry. Daddy George, who nobody's seen, but he is still legally married to Ma. He is still Freddie's dad. So he puts in a claim for the money. After all the dust settled, all the lawyer fees was paid, and what they couldn't determine came from ill-gotten gains, Daddy George got $1,700. And that's the money he used to come to Ocala to collect the bodies, take them back to Welch, Oklahoma, where they're buried in the Williams Timber Hill Cemetery out there. So that's pretty much the end of Ma and Freddie. As I said before, Ma and all 4 boys died gunshot. Start teaching him how to play the guitar. Alvin Carpus gets paroled, goes to Canada for a short time, ends up in Spain, where he ends up dying over there. His death certificate states that he died of an accidental overdose of sleeping pills. But little Charlie, as we know now, when he got out, he is Charles Manson of the Veronica Tate murders. He always wanted to be this big rock and roll star, trying to write songs with the Beach Boys and all that. But just interesting how this has all come together. One more quick story I'll tell you about while I'm picking on the government a little bit. That a bullet went right through her hair. If you read the memos, she and her daughter got out of the house and running down the beach. One of the agents fired a warning shot. They kept on running. But anyway, at the end, 2 of her windows in her house had gotten broken and the screen shot out. She put in a court claim with the federal government to try to get some money to repair her house. The government's reply to Miss Westbury was, "We fired into the Bradford home. If any shots hit your house, it would have came from the Barkers. So you need to take your claim up with the Barkers. Good luck, they are both dead." Those weapons were put in 2 wooden crates and sent to Washington, D.C. We've even got a picture of a docket where they put in these 2 wooden crates. When they got to Washington, D.C., there were no weapons in those crates. All they got was 2 fabric suitcases of some of Ma and Freddie's personal belongings. Nobody to this day knows where any of those weapons are.